Welcome to another installment of Golondrinas live sessions. Thank you all so much for joining us here on this very windy afternoon. I hope you all are staying safe out there. For those of you that join us every couple of weeks for these segments, you know that we like to film outside on site on the rancho. But today the weather was just not permitting that. So excuse any background noise that might come through. As you can see, we had to move the presentation into our education center, but we have a couple of windows and doors open for ventilation. So my name is Laura Gonzalez. I'm the Education and Volunteer Manager here at El Rancho de las Golondrinas Living History Museum, located just south of Santa Fe, New Mexico in the beautiful and historic La Cienega Valley. Joining me today is a very special guest, Dr. Thomas Chavez, to talk to us a little bit about the history of New Mexican society in his presentation, Timeless Caravan, The Story of Survival and Rich Heritage. If at any time during this presentation you have any questions for Dr. Chavez, please put them right there in the comments and we'll get those answered for you. Dr. Chavez is an historian and retired executive director of the National Hispanic Culture Center in Albuquerque. Prior to that, he was the director of the Palace of the Governor's State History Museum right here in Santa Fe for 21 years. Tom is a native New Mexican and a current resident of Albuquerque. He has initiated and supervised many innovative exhibitions at the Palace of the Governors, the National Hispanic Cultural Center, as well as many other local historical institutions. He's researched extensively throughout the United States, Spain, Argentina, Mexico, and Switzerland. Though he served on many boards throughout the years, he currently serves as board member to the New Mexican Endowment for the Humanities, the Instituto Cervantes, and he's also a visiting professor for the Latin American and Iberian Institute through UNM. Of course, the reason we have him here today is because Tom is a very special friend of Las Golondrinas and is also a current board member for us here at Las Golondrinas. Well, Dr. Chavez has received many awards over the years. Most recently, in 2017, the King of Spain conferred upon him the Orden Isabel la Católica, which is the same prestigious award that was given to Mrs. Palajimo, the founder of Las Golondrinas, back in 1995. Now, this award is only bestowed on those people who are advocates for the education and advancement of the history and the culture of Spain, and that advocate for better relations between Spain and other nations. He was also most recently inducted into the Spanish Royal Academy of History for his contributions and a lifetime of work in history. His publications include numerous articles and 12 books. And truly, folks, his accolades are just too long to list here, but all of them, his full biography is available in the post about this video. And now, without further delay, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome and introduce to you Dr. Thomas Chavez. Hello, Dr. Chavez. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And hello to all the docents out there and volunteers. I wished you were here. I wished you could be here because it's always more fun interacting with you. You know, you picking on me and me picking on you. But I guess we're going to have to do it from the distance, as it were. And I'm going to speak for a little while about New Mexico history. A lot of it you've heard before, but I want to start from a different point of view. I want to start from now and what's been going on in our state today or recently with the destruction of statues and the kind of division of cultures that seems to be going on, because it's very anti-New Mexican and very in conflict with our history, as much as people would like to think that it's not. You know, I think about this being the only state that's bilingual, that's Spanish and English in its constitution. I think of this state that has more tribes of Native Americans who live on land in which they inhabited at the time of European contact, which means they've had that land for over 4 centuries. And because there are 22 of them, there are more of them than in the whole eastern half of the United States. I think about, for example, the color of our flag back here, which is red and yellow, the colors of Spanish flag, but it also has the Zia symbol which is the sun symbol of our Native Americans, and especially Zia Pueblo. And all these things kind of come together as to how can this all be, and yet then we're looking at statues and tearing them down because of divisions that we had all these years, and now they've resurfaced again. New Mexico is a history for all its peoples of survival. It's a history where it has been conquered at least 3 or 4 times. The Navajos conquered, basically moved in on the Pueblo Indians and forced them to move up on mesa tops and defend themselves, and took the Pueblo Indians as slaves. And then within 50 years after that, the Spanish showed up and brought a whole new society and religion that it tried to impose on the Pueblo Indians again. And then after that, a few years after that, the most successful Indian rebellion in North American history took place here. And then the Spanish came back 13 years later, not 12 like is normally said, but 13 years later. And then, another century after that or so, the place was conquered again by the United States in the Mexican War in 1846-48. And so we've had a number of conquests. Those are cultural conquests of peoples who came in here and imposed themselves on other peoples, and then the peoples learned to adapt to each other and live together. But there was then the last conquest, and maybe a conquest that we're going through right now with the pandemic and the virus that we have. In the 1880s, the railroad came here, and that gave rise to a kind of a technological industrial conquest of New Mexico, where we didn't have mica windows made out of mica rock. Now we could have glass, and we could have slanted roofs with tin. So there was a whole technological kind of conquest that went on that changed our lifestyles as well. And then now we have, with the labs and everything, the Los Alamos and Sandia lab and the air bases, we have this whole kind of modern thing that's happened to New Mexico. Yet through it all the peoples here have maintained themselves. The Pueblos do their ceremonies. The Hispanics have their traditions. And the people who have come here have brought their traditions and food stuff and language. The language I'm speaking in right now, for example, would be one of the later conquests. But all the other languages have prevailed, and in fact are even being taught in our universities, which is unique here. I mean, for example, in New Mexico, the University of New Mexico is the only university in the world that teaches flamenco. How did all this happen? How can this all happen, and yet we have people that are still bitter with each other, mad enough to throw paint on statues or try to tear them down or get violent over it, or wish one group just leave forever, permanently, which won't happen. It will never happen. You can't go back and turn the pages that way. And so why? It becomes the question. And why is maybe in the history, or maybe not. Maybe it's because there's a lack of understanding of our history, of how this is a place where you see on a map, this one here, New Mexico is up here. It's landlocked. It's in the middle of no place. In fact, one of our governors famously said, lejos de todo, far from everywhere. He was being reassigned here. He got a second term and didn't appreciate it. And so he wringing his hands, wrote to his family, said, I got to go back to that place, in the middle of nowhere. We don't have, great beaches with ocean fronts, and the Rio Grande doesn't take, ocean-going vessels up here. We don't have any ports, so we never had a great big city to inundate us or anything. We just survived here, and the survival here was tough. And that's the key part to all of this. Throughout the years, it was tough. It was hard to live here. The climate here was even more severe than it is today. The summers were hotter and the winters were colder. We have accounts in the documents that in the 18th century, the 1700s, the Rio Grande froze solid enough in Bernalillo where you could drive wagons across it. Imagine how cold that must be to freeze that water that thick so you can take a wagon and horses across it. So it was real cold. And of course there was no central heating or anything. That's a technological thing. And so you had to have your chimeneas going with the fires and stuff. And some of you may know the difference between central heating and a chimenea. That's where you get toasty not warm. You just get toasty. What you do is you get one side of you nice and toasty, and then turn around and get the other side of you nice and toasty. And if you get real lucky, when you got both sides kind of coordinated, you get under the blankets and try to keep toasty. But then somebody has to stay up all night, or at least wake up periodically, to keep the fire going so you don't freeze to death while you're under your blankets. Try it sometime. Turn off all your heat in the dead of winter and see how it works with just your fireplace. And you'll learn real quick how that works. So people had to survive. You know, and there's so many examples of that. One of my favorite artifacts is in the State History Museum collections. It's a sword. And it was a sword made here. Smitty pounded this sword out of a plowshare. The reverse of the biblical saying, pound your swords into plowshares. In New Mexico, to survive, you took your plowshare and made a sword out of it. And that actually happened because of survival. Was there conflict? Oh boy, was there conflict. That was part of the survival. First of all, these conquests we talk about, then the adjustments to living together, the misunderstandings that people had with each other, and natural enemies. There was never a time in New Mexico's history where we lived in a utopian world of peace and love, even though we tried it in the 60s. It just didn't work. And the same goes with the Native Americans. We are all human beings. We are all legends in our own minds. We all think we're better than the other people, and we're superior than the other people. Some cultures even say, that we're people. That's what they call themselves, the people, and everybody else is something else, the others. We even hear that in politics today, don't we? It's not new. And so there's always been conflict, warfare, raiding, taking of captives, even amongst the Indian groups. We know that from the trade fairs in the colonial period, where the Navajos especially and the Utes would bring in captives. And Navajos, just most amazing thing, would go on foot all the way to Nebraska to the Pawnee villages there and raid them and bring back Pawnee captives to sell into the Rio Grande Valley for goodies that they wanted. At one point, the governor of New Mexico said no, and the Navajos killed the Pawnees right in front of the governor. So they know next time he says no, if you say no, you're going to kill these people. You need to save them. So that gave rise to a society or a group of people in New Mexico known as Jeniceros. These were detribalized Indians who become culturally a part of the New Mexican Hispanic society. So you can't, even today, say we are us and they are them. Even somebody like me who claims 13 generations of New Mexican family here, you think about it. Each generation, you double up your ancestors. You have 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great. If you go back 13 generations, which is what I am, I have 4,000 ancestors back there someplace. It just multiplies like that. And of course, that all started with a colony of 800 people that was soon reduced because everybody deserted and left about 200 maximum. And so how did that happen? Well, they had to be great lovers for one. Yeah, really. But also, they mixed. They mixed over time. And of course, they were replenished with subsequent caravans coming from the south to the north. I want to mention about caravans. We had a president that got all excited about caravans coming from Mexico. Folks, caravans have been coming to New Mexico in the southwest for 400 years. 400 years. A lot of us are ancestors of people who came here on caravans. In fact, a lot of our ancestors went back to Mexico on caravans and then came back because they were trading. And so that's not new. That's what the Camino Real is all about. Here in Texas and in California with the same name, Camino Real. People in caravans. So this is not new. And I think we've made up a beautiful part of the heritage of what is the United States today, as a matter of fact. But so all that, happened. All this was hard to live here. There was a Pueblo rebellion where the Pueblos rose and threw the Spanish out, sent them to El Paso, which then was still part of New Mexico. It is today, in my view, at least historically, maybe even culturally. And then 13 years, the Spanish came back. And so people would like to say, there was the Battle of Acoma with Oñate. Then there was the Villa Sur expedition where they were ambushed by the Pawnees and Oto Indians. And there was the Pueblo Revolt. And then the Comanches came in the 18th century, and they were just awful, and they raided everybody, including the Pueblos. In fact, the Comanche raid almost wiped out Taos Pueblo one time. The Comanche raid did wipe out Rancho de Taos, killed all the men there, and took the women and children hostages, one of which is an interesting story. Maria Rosa Valbando was taken, left her young baby son, and she ended up being traded to the Pawnees by the Comanches and lived with the Pawnees for 10 years. And while there, she met a French trader, and she had another son by him. And finally, 3 years after meeting him and having this affair, he ransomed her from the Pawnees and took her to the new village of St. Louis in Missouri. And in St. Louis, Missouri, they finally married in 1770. So this is 10 years after she's taken captive. And she had more children there. And then around 1802, her son that she left here, now grown up, heard the story of this woman with a name like Pando and called Marie Rosa in French, thought that might be his mother. And so he made the journey across the plains to St. Louis. Think about this. This is 19 years before the Santa Fe Trail opened up. And he took this journey to see if this woman, this legend, was his mother. Turned out she was. They had a great happy reunion. They made a settlement about things. She gave him 200 pesos, which was a lot of money. She had become a wealthy landowner there with her family. He met his in-laws or his stepbrothers and sisters, and he came back to New Mexico. She stayed there and died around 1820. And she shows up as a legend of the Santa Fe Trail, of this ancient mariner woman who lived forever with the name of Pando in St. Louis. And turns out she was a New Mexican. One of her sons, who now had a French name because his dad was French, moved back to New Mexico and married into the Vigil family in northern New Mexico. So now there are these Vigils, these Villalpandos, and everybody who live in Taos Valley. They're still there, and they're distant relatives from the mother's son side and mother's daughter side from St. Louis, Missouri. All this kind of stuff makes it that should indicate to anybody who studies the history of New Mexico that we are not a divisive society. We never have been. We are an inclusive society. We've shared our traditions. We've shared our food. Not one culture in New Mexico has become isolated and stayed like it was at the time of European contact or before the Navajos came. They've all progressed. And so you go to things like on Christmas Eve to the Vespers in Okeowinge. San Juan Pueblo. And you go to the Vespers. And at the end of the Vespers, what happens in the front row of the church? These dancers stand up from the Pueblo, Native American dancers. And what are they dancing? The Matachinas. The Matachinas came from Mexico. And so there's this syncretism going on. And we go out into the Pueblo following them. And who's playing the music for them? The local hermanidad, those penitentes. They're singing the rosary behind the Matachinas, marching through the Pueblo with no lights, no electricity. The only modern thing are the Winchesters that the Indians are shooting off into the air. Así es Nuevo Mexico. No place else in North America can that happen. No place else in North America it cannot happen, because only in North America have Europeans and Native Americans and their descendants have lived together, indeed cohabitated together. So this is the survival of New Mexico, an interesting story. Now I want to read to you, it started in the beginning. The first settlement here was not fun. That's why 2/3 of this colony deserted Oñate. Oñate was not a great governor. I have to admit that. But then again, he was the guy that established the first settlement here. He did accomplish that. Not much else, but he accomplished that. But even his own people found that this was a big disappointment. It was like, what are you going north for? Why are you leaving Mexico? What was another opportunity? It's like a lot of those people left Spain to come to New Spain. And some of them went south to Guatemala or on further to Peru, thinking new opportunities. And all of a sudden, here's this big idea, well, let's go north because, there are people up there and we can settle up there and you can live and have land and raise pigs and chickens and, you can be a real landowner like an Hidalgo. Like somebody in Spain. So they got up here and found that this was not so good, that things were cold. And I got to coordinate my hands and my eyes as well. I need my glasses, thanks. Forgot my glasses. Here they are. I got the crew scrambling here, that's good. If I get them to leave, I could really go do something here. Okay, this is from one of the settlers of New Mexico who wrote a letter of complaint while he was here, while Oñate was the governor. Because we are zealous of our honor and so these people were living in fear of their lives, the first colony. And every generation after that that came here, that stayed here, lived in fear of their lives. Fear from attack, yes, but fear more so from just surviving, to be self-sufficient. At first, thank God for the Pueblo Indians, because Pueblo Indians had food enough to help feed the first settlers. And then it took a while for the first settlers to catch on, to dig their acequias. And of course, the settlers brought livestock, which they shared with the Pueblo Indians. Even one of the first colonists under Oñate moved into Santa Clara Pueblo with his sheep and began to share them there. So this happened from the very beginning. And so we get down through the years of people becoming more and more alike, to the point when the Mexican War and Santa Fe Trail opened up. Some of the people coming from the East Coast, the United Statens, couldn't tell the difference between a Pueblo Indian and what they called a Mexican. They were all just Mexicans to them. They all looked alike. You know, even had the Horno ovens. The Pueblo Indians had them. The Spanish Rio Grande Society had them. The adobe houses were all the same, or stone houses. They're all flat roofed. They're all the same. Everything was the same. And so, you know, they didn't know the difference. People living here had become themselves. They'd all become one in a sense. Again, syncretism was going on. And so you see that in the ceremonies, and one of the great ones that happened started in Pecos Pueblo. Pecos was famous for two things in the colonial period. They were great carpenters. They helped build the Palace of the Governors, for example, or the Gobierno Palace, the Palacio de Gobierno. So they helped build that. They also were great imitators. They loved to imitate. And one of the things they imitated was something the Spanish brought here, a bull run. You know, like in Pamplona in Spain, only they did it here, and the people in Pecos started copying that. And they did it every first weekend of, on their Saints' Day, every first weekend of August. But then the Pueblo slowly died away, probably because it was right placed on the Santa Fe Trail and the influence of the Santa Fe Trail, and then the armies coming through and the Mexican War and everything else screwed it up. And so the last of the 30-some people of Pecos Pueblo left in the 1830s and moved to their language-speaking cousins at Jemez Pueblo. And at Jemez Pueblo, to today, on the first weekend of every August, they have a bull run. I'm not going to tell you anything more about that bull run because they were great imitators. But it's another one of these things that is, you know, only in New Mexico could that happen. And it only could happen in New Mexico because these people learned to survive together. They learned to survive together. So you don't have to know the details of New Mexican history. I could tell you dates and names. I could tell you, you know, give you the biography of this person or that person, or tell you about this episode or that episode. But you need to, if you look at the big picture, right away you should question those people today who detract us from our society, who say that, you know, Spanish descendants and Native American descendants have never gotten along and can't get along, because it is a bold-faced lie. I hate to say it, but history tells you that. And we need to learn that the inclusivity of New Mexico's history is unique in North America. It is a message we should take to the rest of this country, in fact, the rest of the world. Because here, for example, we'll go to an Indian ceremonial dance and not kill the dancer. Sounds stupid, and some of you are laughing out there. I can see you because I've said it in front of you before, and you laughed. Or, go have chili for breakfast and not kill the cook, And you don't even have to be Spanish or Indian to enjoy that. Everybody in New Mexico enjoys it. And why is that? It's syncretism. It's the meshing of the cultures. It's made us richer people for it, dividing us, taking down our icons, complaining, denigrating another culture to show up yours. All that stuff is destructive to what, and contrary to what our history and our heritage is all about. And our heritage is a rich heritage. It is a lesson for our national heritage, for our national leaders. At a time when things are divisive too, New Mexico has a story for them as well, beginning with those caravans. So, to go on with this, if you look at this landlocked area and you look at the big picture, you're talking about three general movements here. First of all, the home court, to use a basketball analogy, of the Native Americans are here. Mountains, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. But then they got pushed again, and they ended up in the beautiful place where they are today, up by Dulce, New Mexico. Just, God's paradise there. So even the Indian tribes are pushing tribes as they move through the thing. And so in this landlocked place, there's the Native Americans, and then came the Spanish from the south to the north. And they came, had the same experiences as the people who would come later from the west to the east. The people from Northern Europe, if you will, the Protestants and the Catholics overall, coming in different directions. And they came into the continent. Spanish got up here first. They didn't just expand slowly. It was all populated. They came slowly up this way, and then eventually they skipped, and then New Mexico became an island in the wilderness. Previous in Europe, the Catholic idol worshippers were here, and they were dastardly bad people who had done awful things to the Indians, of course the English Protestants were heretics from a strong Catholic's point of view. And then they meet in New Mexico. They have like a choque, if you will. They meet again, and they're kind of looking at each other and trying to figure out, well, are they us or not? Are they people of color or not? Which is still, what goes on today. And are they capable of democracy or not later on from the Anglo point of view? All that, and it happened here in New Mexico in this landlocked place, this conflict. And the beautiful thing about that is all these people with their prejudices over time tended to drop their prejudices. And it's interesting that happened. That all of a sudden, the museums and the cultural institutions that were started in the territorial years here were started by people who came from the East Coast to preserve the history and the cultures of the people they found here, they encountered here, the Native Americans and the Hispanics. They are the ones who started collecting the stuff in creating a historical society, in creating an old Santa Fe association. They wanted to preserve what was here. Completely different than some people, even today, who come here who don't understand that these are rich cultures that are here, that have survived here for all these years. So, this is kind of what happened. And, we hear today in a conflict, and it's still, it's not new. It's like Harry Truman said, there's nothing new in the history you haven't read. Remember when New Mexico was part of Mexico, and then when Mexico lost the war in 1848, New Mexico became part of the United States. And right away, New Mexico petitioned to be a state of the United States. It had a population large enough, and so by constitutional law, it was eligible to be a state. But Congress wouldn't grant it. Why? Those people, the majority of them don't speak English, and they're Catholic. We'll make them a territory. Kind of like where Puerto Rico is today. And so they made us a territory. And then we have an election because we can send a representative, like Puerto Rico. They have a representative. Ours didn't get to vote, but could be there, kind of observe, sit in the lower chamber. And in the election of 1853, we elected a former priest who didn't speak English. So now we have this Spanish-speaking, non-English-speaking former Catholic priest representing us in Washington. And what happened? The person that lost, William Carr Lane, had his people in Washington challenge the election. They challenged the vote. You guys cheated. Well, it didn't overturn the vote, but the interesting thing that came out of that was Congress decided, oh yeah, there were a whole bunch of votes that voted for him that don't count. The Native American vote. In New Mexico, it was just assumed that no Native Americans could vote alongside any Hispanic. And it was Congress that took the vote away from them. We were inclusive. The national government was exclusive. One of the great ironies of all of this is Spain has some fame for introducing the vaccine to the Americas, the vaccine to prevent smallpox. The story's a great story of a doctor who figured, we can inoculate children and then keep inoculating one after the other. And they put a bunch of orphans on a ship and sent them to Mexico. And from there, they started inoculating throughout the Americas, went down to South America and then up north and came to New Mexico. And that doctor, incidentally, continued on to the Philippine Islands where he started inoculations there, went to India where he started it there, circumnavigated the globe, inoculating against the smallpox. Overlooked in the histories of this division that people want to talk about was that Spain inoculated Native Americans to prevent the smallpox. They never intentionally introduced a disease. There's no evidence of that anywhere. The only intentional evidence of a disease being introduced by Europeans to Native Americans took place in New England when the English gave an infected blanket to a tribe they were trying to eliminate. That's the only one documented evidence of that. And so here you have Spain giving vaccines to people. So that gets to something else. As we sit home today, now with the coronavirus, and you're frustrated because you can't be here and throw things at me like you like to do, and I can't tease you in person like I like to do, and we have to do this by distance, and you have to look at me because it's kind of ugly on screen and stuff. That's okay. This is not new either. You think this is the worst thing in the world because we got to stay home and wear masks. Wear them. Be safe. I want you back here. I want you to heckle me some more. I look forward to that day when we can get together. And so, do it. Take care of yourself. But this is not the worst thing that's happened in New Mexico, even with disease. Oh yeah, we don't have football. Too bad, People, everyone who came here, the first Spaniards who came here, were all ugly. I hate to say that. Even my own ancestors were ugly because it's hard to believe when you see me, right? But they were all pock-marked. They'd all suffered, the smallpox and different diseases. Their skin was all screwed up. Their teeth weren't much better. And so they'd already suffered. And then, in the 18th century, the flu hit New Mexico. in the late 1860s, or 1760s to 1770. Flu hit New Mexico. A third of New Mexico's population died. And that wasn't just Native Americans, it was everybody. And there are accounts in the documents of people just seeing bodies on the side of the road. And what was worse than it is now is we couldn't sit home and watch TV, and entertain ourselves or that. But there was also a famine going on and a drought. And so along with the dead bodies of human beings, there were rotting bodies of cows and pigs and stuff that couldn't get water and couldn't be fed anymore. So people were starving on top of the disease running rampant through them. It was a horrible time. And of course, we know in New Mexico's history, just as we were about to get into World War I as a country, the flu epidemic broke out in the Army bases. The most famous one was Fort Carson up here in Colorado, when New Mexican kids died. They were some of the first ones to die of the flu in that base. And that epidemic spread throughout the nation again, and more people died then, up to now, than have died now. So this is not new. This is not new. Some people alive today, a little older than me, probably have memories from their grandparents talking about the flu epidemic that swept through New Mexico and the deaths that happened then, and the trials and tribulations of then. So that's my message to you today. History is true. It's like New Mexico true, history true, right? I want to share history true. And if you know your history, especially New Mexico history, you will stand up against division. You will stand up against prejudice. You'll stand up for inclusion. You will stand up for appreciation of other cultures because we're richer for it. And you will understand that as you live in New Mexico, you are benefiting from everybody who's been here before, from their language to their food to their music, even to the very place names of New Mexico, from Poshawaki, Okeowinge, Santa Fe, Albuquerque without the R, Socorro, and even the weird name of Raton for a city. But it's New Mexico. Así es New Mexico. It's a special place in our history. Is a rich history that the lessons from which need to be learned in the rest of the world. So if you have any questions, if you want to heckle me from the distance, I invite you to do so. Otherwise, are there questions?
There are a couple of questions, Dr.
Okay.
Chavez. We've got one here from Joe. Is New Mexico the only place where indigenous people conquered a European power?
Say that again.
Is New Mexico the only place where the indigenous people conquered a European power? I think he's referring to the Pueblo Revolt.
Yeah. No. There were other successful battles, if you will, in the East where the Native Americans rose and defeated Europeans, but not as thorough and complete as in New Mexico. New Mexico, the Pueblo Rebellion of 1680 is the most successful Indian rebellion in North American history, whereas the Europeans had to leave and regather and decide. Actually, they weren't sure they were ever going to come back, except the priest argued that they wanted to come back, and they had some Pueblo representation that went and asked them to come back, because then the Pueblos were getting raided by the nomadic tribes around them, and they didn't have the defense of Spain. So, but this was the most successful Indian rebellion, and let me speak to that, because I'm being kind of Pollyannish about being inclusive and everything, and aren't we just lovely getting along together? No, we didn't always get along together. Why does that surprise people? Why do they say, but Tom, there was a Pueblo rebellion. Oh, but Tom, this happened or that happened. Yes. I come from a family that was fairly large. A brother and 3 sisters. We fought all the time. Even got mad at my mom and dad on occasion because I was the oldest, and I always got in trouble because of them. Those of you who are married know what it's like if you're married. You work to stay together, and you have your arguments. Now, if we who love each other have our fights and arguments, how do you expect whole societies to live lovey-dovey like a utopian world, in a utopian's world? Of course we will have our differences. The key is even despite the Pueblo Rebellion, we got along, came back together, and we improved on our relationship and survived together.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Chavez. Another question here. Why are some Spanish last names spelled with an S and others are spelled with a Z? And as a Gonzalez with an S, I'm curious to know the answer as well.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, and Chavez with a Z, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Those names were always with an S. Even Lopez was an S. I have a couple of theories on that. You know, the most obvious is somebody didn't know how to spell. But I've even seen my surname in documents with a B, C-H-A-B as in boy, E-S, Chavez, right? Chavez. And I suppose if you're from Castile, it would sound right, Chavez, Chavez. Okay, but there was always an S. That was the original way. And incidentally, not every name with E-S means son of, like Martinez. That means son of Martin. But that's not true of every name. Chavez was always Chavez. It wasn't son of Chavez. Gonzalo, yeah, Gonzalez, right? Lopez was Lopes or Lopes. So why? Why did that happen? My theory, my real theory isn't that people couldn't spell and didn't know better or anything. And some people did phonetically spell things out because they weren't that literate. But the S's in the 18th and 16th century looked like Z's. And somehow in the early 1900s, early 1800s, 19th century, the names, even in my family, the documents are SSSS up until the early 1800s, and all of a sudden becomes Z. And then there's S's and Z's, and now mostly it's Z's, although there are still a few S's. That happened with every other name. The other thing I talk about surnames is Chavez is a name that comes out of northern Portugal, actually, over conquest of a town that the Moors inhabited and Christians took, and these two brothers who were Lopez showed the Christian army how to get in, sneak into the town, and when they snuck into the town, opened the gates, and so he took it. So the Lord, you know, the guy who was in charge of the Christian army bestowed upon them the new name of Chavez, or Chaves, as they said then, Chaves. Which is the Portuguese pronunciation of Chavez. Lopes, like Davy Lopes, the baseball player, is the Portuguese pronunciation of Lopez. So Lopes comes out of Portuguese too. So what's another question?
Let's see, folks. Any more questions for Dr. Chavez out there? We have a lovely comment here by one of our volunteers. Always enjoys a Dr. Chavez presentation. You really make New Mexico history come alive.
Oh, I want to thank my mother for that. It's not my mother, I know.
Well, folks, if you have any other questions, go ahead and put them right there in the comments.
Yeah, try to stump me.
Let's see. Oh, here we go. We got one from fellow board member here, Miss Carla Aragon. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Carla.
How has DNA, programs like Ancestry DNA, helped or hurt history?
How does DNA?
Yes. How have DNA programs, things like Ancestry DNA or that 23andMe, how have they helped or hurt history?
You know, it is science, and I'm not a science denier for that, but it's still evolving so far as its accuracy, I believe. I have a problem with some generalities. If you know, I've done my DNA, and part of it they said, "Oh, you're Western European, you're part Celt, and part Mediterranean." Well, all of that could be Spanish, you know. But that DNA company at that time, now this was a few years ago, I don't think thought that Spain was part of Europe, you know, which is kind of a problem we have still in our schools when we teach European history. And so there's that. There's a problem of actually defining down to details, even though the DNA people want to say that. I still am not completely convinced when you do your DNAs for Jewish heritage, because Judaism to me is a religion. So if I converted today, does my DNA change? You know, how does that happen? In the Jewish society, there's the agnostic and the Sephardic. Are the DNA different? You know, that kind of stuff, I haven't studied it enough, but I think it'd be interesting. There needs to be the science needs to keep evolving to get more accurate, I believe. But it's still a good handle because, I do believe in my DNA, and it said I'm 14% Native American. I believe that. That doesn't, 13 generations, how many thousands of people are involved in the family? Of course there's going to have to be somebody who's mixed blood more than once, or even whole blood that got into the family. Obviously that in New Mexico, because we're not heavily populated. That's what makes us good looking. Come on, guys, get over it.
All right, folks, any other questions for Dr. Chavez?
No more questions?
No more questions, Dr.
Well,
Chavez. Looks like you covered everything.
Okay, guys,
And-
I hate to leave you. I'm having so much fun. I don't want to go because it's windy outside. But we'll see each other together in the near future, I'm sure. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chavez. We really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much for your continued dedicated service on our board of directors. Tom very often comes to Las Golondrinas to do presentations for us during our programmings, during our trainings. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And thank you all, folks, for joining us on this very windy and kind of chilly afternoon. I hope you're all staying safe and warm. Just a friendly reminder that we do these Golondrinas live sessions about every 2 weeks, sometimes sooner. Just keep up with us right here on our Facebook and our Instagram at SF Golondrinas for details about the next upcoming installment of Golondrinas live sessions, as well as other updates about the ranch. A reminder that the ranch is going to be opening up to a limited capacity starting tomorrow, Wednesday, September 9th. You have to visit our website, golondrinas.org. It has all the detailed information. Reserved pre-purchase tickets are required. So get on our website, check that out. We hope to see you out here at the ranch, at least for the next few weeks. We'll be continuing to do these live installments, so just keep up with us on that. Start your adventure at golondrinas.org. Thank you all so much for your continued support of our programming and what we do here, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful evening.